The mark wasn't a fool, right? Right. The con player produced a sturdy brown envelope. The sucker counted all the scratch in his pocket into the hand of Aunt Kate's outside business manager. The efficient, affable manager shoved it into the envelope, licked it, sealed it, and stuck it in his pocket for safekeeping from the possible larceny in the hearts of the gorgeous dolls upstairs, 3rd floor, first apartment to the left, number 9 to be specific. The sucker was in a bubbly mood as he took the stairs 3 at a time. He liked that nigger down there who was protecting his money. What had he told him when he gave him the shiny gold-colored metal check? Harry, pal, this one's on me. Just go up and hand it to Aunt Kate. Everything is going to be all right. If you want, you can buy me a drink when you come down. The 2 strikes that had whiffed across the white man's mental plate and had set him up for the kill. The 3rd strike was first his desperate need to relieve himself into a black body. The 2nd was his complete inability to conceive that the black boy before him was intelligent enough to fool him, to fashion the Murphy dialogue. Party and his raw-boned lore after 3 weekends of fair success with the Murphy ran head-on into a round brick balloon. It was only 5 feet tall, but it weighed close to 300 pounds. It was a Saturday night around 10. The vice section was overrun with Johns. It seemed that every white man in town was out there, scratch in one hand and a rod in the other, ripping and running after the black whores with the wildest, blackest asses. Party and I set up a blind on the fringe of the section because, with all of that mad action in the center, it would be a hectic cat-and-mouse game with the cruising, rousting vice squad. I would have gotten something less than pure kicks to get busted making like a broad. Party hadn't strong-armed since his last bit. The only reason he hadn't was simply that none of the Johns we had fleeced was carrying a wad. We were fishing in a sand pile. All the hungry suckers were swimming in center stream. From my Murphy station in the alley, I watched Party eagerly for the office for action. Around 11:30, I was standing on one leg and then the other like a bored crane with a 25-cent dress on. About 5 minutes later, the office came through. Was it a man? A machine? No. It was a walking, living, round balloon with a fat poke and a flaming itch for black kush. It stood there fascinated by my furious bumps and grinds. I felt prickly feet of excitement stomping along my spine when the balloon took his hide out. Party jerked rigid at the sight of its contents. Even as the balloon bounced toward me, I inched toward my point of evaporation. I knew the strong-arm lust had exploded inside Party, and sure as hell he was going to come up that alley and smash the air out of the balloon. I quit the scene and poked my head into the alley, farther up. I could hear guttural grunting, the kind of sound a heart case makes when he's riding hard to convince a nympho that he's a raging tiger. It was the balloon that was grunting, and he held Party in a crushing stranglehold. My heartbeat backfired and melted the starch in my props. I collapsed onto a garbage can. The balloon was also a weightlifter. Poor Party was hanging high over the head of the monster and then flung to the alley floor with a shattering whoomp, where he lay like a rag doll. The balloon hollered as he leaped into the air and then fell like a ton of concrete on moaning Party. I was almost puking in pity for Party, but I just couldn't find the strength to get off that garbage can and join the fray. Anyway, it wouldn't have been ladylike. The derrick scooped Party from the alley and flung him across his back. I watched Party's rubber neck bumping against the balloon's rear end as he was carried to the sidewalk. I jetted out of there and went to the roof of my building. I watched for the rollers I was sure were coming to bust me, but they never came. Old Party had had the funky luck to try the strong arm on a professional wrestler called the Blimp. Party went back to the joint for a yard after he got out of City Hospital. One thing about Party, he wasn't copper hatred. He never tipped my name to the heat. When he got older and lost his nerve to hustle, he got a crazy desire to pimp. He wasn't the type, but he kept trying until he ran the guerrilla game on a dope dealer's broad and was set up for a hot shot. Party tried his fists and muscle until the pimp game croaked him. The pimp game is like the watchmaker's art. It's tough. Party went through his life struggling to make a watch while wearing boxing gloves. Party's bad break sobered me, and I started hearing what was going on in day classes at school. At 15, amazingly, I graduated from high school with a 98.4 average. There was a sizable alumni of Tuskegee, a Southern Negro college, who insisted upon Mama letting them underwrite all expenses for my education at their alma mater. Mama leaped at the chance. The alumni went into debt and sent me down to their hallowed school with a sparkling wardrobe. They didn't know I had started to rot inside from the street poisoning. It was like the poor chumps had entered a poison horse in the Kentucky Derby and were certain they had a cinch winner. They couldn't know that they had their hearts and blood money on a born loser. A rich bonanza was at stake, the success of my very life itself, the rescue of Mama from her awesome guilt, the trust and confidence of that big-hearted alumni. My mental eyes had been stabbed blind by the street. I was like a freakish joker who had gotten clap in his eyes from a mangy street whore. On campus, I was like a fox in a chicken coop. Within 90 days after I got down there, I had slit the maidenhead on a half-dozen curvy co-eds. Somehow, I managed to get through the freshman year, but my notoriety was getting awful. The campus finks were envious, and it was too dangerous to continue to impale co-eds on my steak. In my sophomore year, I started going into the hills near the campus to juke joints. With my slick northern dress and manner, I was Prince Charming in spades to the pungent, hot-ass maidens in the hills. A round-butt, barefoot beauty, 15 years old, fell hard for me. One night, I failed to meet her in our favorite clump of bushes. I had stuck her up to keep a date in another clump of bushes with a bigger, hotter, rounder ass than hers. Through the hill grapevine, she got the wire of my double-cross. It was high noon on campus the next day when I saw her. I had just walked out of the cafeteria onto the main drag. The street was lousy with students and teachers. She stood out like a pope in a cat house. Her potato sack dress was grimy and dirty as hell from the long trip from the hills. Her bare feet and legs were rusty and dusty. She saw me, a wild heart beat after I saw her. She battle-cried like an Apache warrior, and before I can get the wax out of my props, she had raced close enough toward me so that I could see the insane fury in her eyes. Beads of sweat clung to the kinky hair and the pit of her arm that was upraised. Gripping like a dagger of a broken Coca-Cola bottle, the jagged edges were glinting in the sun. The screaming teachers and students fled like terrified sheep in the wake of a panther. I don't remember what athlete was reputed to be the fastest human in the world that year, but for those few seconds after I got the wax out of my legs, I was. When I finally looked back through the cloud of dust, I saw the crazy broad as a speck in the distance behind me. Mine had been a carpet offense, and I was honored in the office of the school president. I stood before him seated behind his gleaming mahogany desk. He cleared his pipes and gave me a look like I had jacked off before the student body. He held his head high, his nose reaching for the ceiling like I was crap on his top lip. In a sneaky southern drawl, he said, "Boy, you are a disgrace to our fine institution. I'm shocked that such has occurred. Your mother has been informed of your bad conduct. Our board is considering your dismissal. In the meantime, keep your nose clean, boy. You are not to leave campus for any reason." I could have saved my worry over dismissal. That alumni had powerful pull, all right. I got a break and got the chance to stay until midterm of the sophomore year when I went for the okey-doke. I took a bootlegging rap for a pal. What goes around comes around, old hustlers had said. Party had taken our beef without spilling. Anything with a buzz in it was in great demand on campus. A pint of rot-gut whiskey brought from $7.50 to $10, depending on supply. My roommate had scratch and a Fagin disposition. He was a Sharpie from a number racket family in New York. We made a deal. He would bankroll our venture if I copped the merchandise and sold it. He got my promise that I would keep his part in it a secret. He was a fox for sure. He gave me the scratch, and I slipped up into the hills to contact a moonshiner who would supply me. Perhaps I don't have to say that I carefully avoided any contact with that broad who pushed me to that track record. I scored for a connection, and the markup on campus was 400%. Everything was beautiful. The merchandise was moving like crazy. I was sure that when I got back home for the summer, I would have enough scratch to turn everybody green with envy. I recruited a co-ed I had laid to distribute for me in her dorm. It was the beginning of the end. There were 2 Jasper co-eds in her dorm who were fierce rivals for the love of a coffee-colored, curvaceous doll from a country town in Oklahoma. The doll was really dumb. She had no idea of the lesbian kick, so naturally she couldn't know she was a target. Eventually, the crafty of the 2 Jaspers wore the doll down and turned her out. They had to keep the secret of their romance from the other Jasper because she was so tough and built like a football player. She was doing money favors for the doll, hoping to get into her pants. The doll and her jockey were in cahoots, playing the sucker Jasper hard for the scratch. One night the doll and her jockey were tied into a pretzel doing the 69 and drunk as hell on my merchandise when their passionate outcries reached the ears of the muscular Jasper. The bloody fight and spicy details were topics for statewide gossip. In the heat of the investigation, my agent fell apart. She put the finger on me, and within a week, I was on the train going back to the streets for good. I didn't turn over on my roommate. I obeyed the code. Mama changed jobs a week after I got back to nurse and cook for a wealthy white recluse. Now I really stuck my nose in the devil's ass. Mama had to stay on the place. I saw her once a week on Sunday when she would come in for a day. That was the only time I stayed at the hotel. I had found a fascinating second home, a gambling joint run by a broken-down ex-pimp and murderer called Diamond Tooth Jimmy. The 2-carat stone wedged between the upper front rotting teeth was the last vulgar memento of his infamy as the top ass-kicker of the 1920s. He boasted endlessly that he was the only nigger pimp on earth who had ever pimped in Paris on French girls. I was to discover later, when I would meet and be trained by the master, that Jimmy was a mere buffoon, an amateur not fit to hold the master's coat. After the suckers were trimmed and all the shills had been paid, Jimmy would lock the door and then, like a ritual, light up a thin brown reefer. As he talked, he would pass it to me, cursing me affably for not inhaling deeply and holding the smoke, as he put it, deep in my belly. When dawn broke, he would go out through the joint door home to the 19-year-old Jasper on whom he lavished furs and jewels. He was a real sucker. I would go to bed in the tiny cubicle in the rear of the joint and dream fantastic dreams. Always beautiful whores would get down on their knees and tearfully beg me to take their money. For several months, I had been screwing the luscious daughter of a popular band leader. She was 15. Her name was June, and she had a wild yen for me. She had a habit of waiting down the street from the gambling joint until Jimmy left, and then she would come up and get on the army cot with me. She would